Bills Mafia. This is exactly the time of year when emotions start swinging in every possible direction. On one hand, training camp is nearly here, which means real football is finally within reach. On the other hand, this is also the exact moment when some genuinely difficult roster decisions start taking shape behind the scenes. And not everyone wearing a Bills jersey today is going to still be wearing one when Week 1 finally arrives. We've got two massive stories to unpack today. First, we're diving into a handful of former draft picks who are walking into training camp with far more pressure riding on their shoulders than most fans probably realize. Guys who could genuinely be fighting to save their entire NFL careers over the next several weeks. Then, we're shifting gears to talk about a brand new rumor connecting Buffalo to two former All-Pro wide receivers. One name that's going to get this fan base fired up, and another that might just split the room right down the middle. Let's get into it. Every single year around this point in the offseason, we get caught up in the excitement of new additions, rookie classes, and marquee position battles. But there's a much less glamorous reality lurking underneath all of that. Not everyone makes the team. The Bills have until the end of August to trim their roster down to the final 53, and according to the latest reporting, 4 returning draft picks are walking into camp with their roster spots genuinely up for grabs. Let's start with offensive tackle Chase Lunt, a 6th-round selection from last year's draft class. At first glance, you might assume Lunt caught a real break after the departure of a veteran swing tackle who left in free agency, opening up a spot in the tackle rotation. But dig a little deeper, and that assumption starts to fall apart. The starting tackle spots remain firmly locked down, and right behind them, another young defensive convert appears to have the inside track at the primary backup tackle role, a player the coaching staff already trusted enough to plug into that swing role during his own rookie campaign before injuries slowed his development. Then there's this year's rookie tackle out of Boston College, a player Buffalo used one of its 3 fourth-round picks on, and it's genuinely hard to imagine spending that kind of draft capital only to leave him off the 53-man roster. That leaves Lunt in an incredibly uncomfortable spot. He played just a handful of offensive snaps during his entire rookie season. And while there's clearly some developmental upside there, Buffalo may simply decide to carry only 4 true tackles this year. Factor in another interior lineman who also has legitimate experience kicking out to tackle in a pinch, and Lunt's path to actually making this roster looks considerably tougher than a lot of fans probably expected heading into camp. Next up is edge rusher Jaquan Solomon, and honestly, this one is a little surprising because the scheme change this defense is undergoing should theoretically work in his favor. Buffalo is expected to lean much more heavily into 3-4 defensive looks this season, and his skill set genuinely seems tailor-made for that kind of system. The problem here isn't talent. The problem is sheer roster math. Buffalo brought in a notable veteran edge rusher in free agency who's expected to start, then used a premium early draft pick on another young pass rusher specifically to inject more youth and juice into that rotation. Add in a former standout returning from a torn Achilles who's progressing well in his recovery, along with another accomplished veteran joining the competition after a decorated career elsewhere, and suddenly there's an awful lot of established talent standing between Solomon and any real meaningful playing time. His saving grace is his special teams value. If Buffalo decides to roll with 6 true edge rushers on the final roster, that alone might be enough to save his spot. But if they go leaner at the position, he becomes one of the more precarious bubble players on the entire team. Then there's center Cedric Van Pran Granger, and this might honestly be the most fascinating situation of the entire group. Not because he lacks talent, but because Buffalo suddenly finds itself with an absolute embarrassment of riches at the center position. The starting job is fully secured by a veteran who re-signed with the team this offseason. Then Buffalo added another accomplished center in free agency, someone the offensive coordinator has already publicly praised as a legitimate starting caliber player in his own right. Beyond that, there's yet another free agent addition who's expected to compete at left guard, but brings real experience snapping the football too. Plus, another interior lineman capable of handling center duties if needed. That means before Van Pran-Granger even enters the conversation, there are already 4 other players on this roster capable of playing the position. He hasn't seen much game action since being drafted a couple years back, but he still brings real value thanks to a standout college career and demonstrated special teams contributions. Given the sheer depth at this spot, there's a growing belief that instead of simply releasing him outright, Buffalo could explore trading him during camp if another team around the league suffers a center injury, allowing the front office to recoup some value instead of losing a talented young player for absolutely nothing. And finally, there's the truly unique case of Travis Clayton. He entered the league through the NFL's International Player Pathway program and spent his first 2 seasons quietly developing as an offensive tackle on the practice squad. Now he's making an enormous, almost unprecedented transition, shifting from the offensive line all the way over to the interior defensive line. That's an extraordinarily difficult adjustment for any player at the NFL level, especially when the roster already features 8 established defensive linemen ahead of him on the depth chart. At 6'7", there's no denying he brings genuinely intriguing physical tools to the table, but learning a brand new position at this level simply doesn't happen overnight. Barring an absolutely remarkable training camp performance, the most realistic path forward is probably another season developing on the practice squad while he continues learning the position from the ground up. Step back and look at these 4 names together, and it says a lot about just how much deeper this roster has become. A couple of years ago, some of these same players probably would have felt considerably more secure heading into camp. Now they're fighting for every single rep because the front office has continued stacking competition at nearly every spot on the roster. It's tough to watch young players battle for their NFL futures like this, but this is exactly what a championship-caliber roster is supposed to look like. Nothing gets handed out anymore. Every single spot has to be earned. Now let's shift over to a storyline that's guaranteed to spark some real debate across the fan base. Ever since Buffalo moved on from Stephon Diggs a couple seasons back, fans have been waiting for this team to truly replace that true number 1 receiver presence. The latest attempt came this offseason when Buffalo traded for DJ Moore, a player who's undeniably been one of the more explosive receivers in the league throughout his career. Even though his production has admittedly dipped over the past couple of seasons, that's left some lingering questions about whether this receiver room has enough overall firepower to genuinely push for a championship. And that's exactly where a recent report from a national analyst comes into play, suggesting Buffalo could be a logical landing spot for not one, but 2 former All-Pro wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins and Tyreek Hill. Let's start with Hopkins. This is a 5-time All-Pro who once led the entire league in touchdown catches, and as recently as a couple seasons ago, he was still posting 1,000-yard receiving campaigns. The question here isn't whether Hopkins can still play the game at a high level. It's whether Buffalo actually wants to go down the aging veteran receiver road one more time. Hopkins is now 34 years old and has publicly expressed a desire to play for a legitimate championship contender, and Buffalo certainly checks that box. But here's the real concern. Bills fans have already watched this front office take multiple swings on veteran receivers in recent years, and neither one really turned into what everybody hoped for. One veteran addition simply never became the difference maker the fan base envisioned. Another struggled with costly drops throughout an entire season, including one gut-wrenching moment during a playoff loss where a deep completion slipped away and turned into a back-breaking interception. Plenty of fans still believe the officiating on that specific play was questionable, but the reality is that controversy never even enters the conversation if the catch is simply made cleanly in the first place. After a couple of veteran receiver experiments that didn't fully solve the problem, it's fair to wonder whether Buffalo is genuinely ready to roll those dice again. Then there's Tyreek Hill, And honestly, just hearing his name connected to Buffalo feels a little strange given everything that's happened over the years between these two sides historically. Hill led the league in receptions a couple seasons back, won a championship earlier in his career, and later became one of the most electrifying stars in the league after his move to Miami. Unfortunately, a serious knee injury wiped out most of his production last season, and he's now looking to revive his career elsewhere. The football argument here is genuinely tempting. Josh Allen represents an enormous upgrade at quarterback for him, and playing alongside an already established 1-2 punch at receiver would allow him to ease back into a significant role rather than needing to single-handedly carry an entire offense on the way back from injury. A fully healthy version of Hill would bring game-changing speed, capable of altering opposing defensive game plans the moment he steps on the field. But football isn't the only factor at play here. Hill has also dealt with a number of well-documented off-field incidents throughout his career, and that's exactly the kind of thing this front office has consistently weighed heavily when building out its locker room culture over the years. Realistically, that's probably the single biggest reason this particular connection feels unlikely to actually happen. Nobody questions the talent. The real question is whether the full package fits the kind of culture this organization has worked so hard to build. Put both of these stories together, and they actually paint a pretty clear picture of exactly where this franchise stands right now. This roster has become deep enough that recently drafted players are genuinely fighting just to survive final roster cuts, while at the exact same time, plenty of people around the league are still wondering whether one more impact addition at wide receiver could finally push this offense over the top. That's simply the reality of chasing a championship. Every roster decision matters. Every position battle matters. And every move the front office makes between now and Week 1 could end up being the difference come January. So Bills Mafia, we want to hear from you. Out of those 4 bubble players, who do you think actually deserves a spot on the final 53? And if Buffalo does add one more veteran receiver before the season starts, would you rather see DeAndre Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, or neither one at all? Sound off in the comments and let us know exactly where you land. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you smash that like button, drop your predictions down in the comments, and if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and hit that button so you don't miss a single update as training camp approaches. Every roster decision is going to matter, and we'll be covering all of it. Go Bills, we'll see you in the next one.